Hello, and a very warm welcome to this edition of the Ponsonby and Massey podcast. A lot to get through. Donald Trump's state visit is at an end. Success or failure, we ask. At Holyrood, the not proven verdict has eventually been abolished after many, many decades of campaigning from those within the justice system. Good for justice, bad for justice. A little altercation in Parliament between Jamie Hepburn and Douglas Ross. Where is this going? Might Jamie Hepburn get a yellow card from the First Minister? Could this end up in a red card? We'll ponder the changing modes of behaviour of our tribunes. And on a much, much, much more serious note going forward, the Auditor General has some tough observations for the government this week about how they're going to run out of money in terms of welfare commitments, a possible bill, black hole, in fact, in the public finances by the year 2029-30. We're going to chew over that as well. But starting with the story which has had saturation coverage in the UK this week, and that is Donald Trump's second state visit to the UK. And Alex, it strikes me after 2 weeks of absolute hell for the Prime Minister, the worst 2 weeks of his premiership.
So far.
He had 2 days of respite, and I suspect from his point of view, he will say, what a relief that the Donald didn't go off and won at that press briefing yesterday. And secondly, it's a pretty big win for Starmer.
I think so. I mean, you're absolutely right that the international stage has become the area in which has almost become Keir Starmer's safe space, which is remarkable when you look at some of the problems around the world that the UK and the United States and other countries are having to grapple with. But yes, a welcome diversion from his domestic travails. And although, there were aspects of the press conference yesterday that Trump being Trump, his suggestion, the way to deal with small boats crossing the English Channel and so on is to use the Royal Navy or the Royal Air Force to sink them, get the military involved, etc. That's not the sort of thing that Keir Starmer necessarily wants to hear. It's certainly not a recommendation that he's going to take on board. There were obvious other differences on Ukraine, on Gaza, on wind power and renewable energy, but none of these were sufficient, really, I think, to, if you like, torpedo the overall success of the state visit, which is measured in unusual terms because of almost as much by what didn't happen as by what did. Although some of the things that were announced were quite significant. I mean, genuinely significant US tech investments in the United Kingdom. The boss of NVIDIA, the chip manufacturer, suggesting that, the UK is undervalued as an investment opportunity, and that there are great potential here on data centers and AI and other things of that sort. That is genuinely quite significant, I think. And it is, if we take a step back, we see that the UK is essentially going to be aligning itself in terms of the regulation of AI and assorted tech matters in the future much more closely with the United States, I suspect, than it is with the European Union. There is a divergence there that is made easier by the post-Brexit environment. And from whatever one may think about Brexit, it seems to me that as if you like, a tech play, backing the United States is probably a better long-term prospect than backing the EU. But the other thing, of course, I suppose about Trump's visit that was quite amusing was John Swinney getting a little bit of criticism from the left wing, if you like, of Scottish politics for attending the official state banquet. Chris Law, the Dundee MP, wrote a tweet on X where he said anyone who attends this banquet and so on is essentially complicit in genocide in Gaza.
And then he took it down.
Yes, I think he then realized, or was perhaps reminded, that his party leader was attending the banquet. John Swinney attended. It was notable that the First Ministers of Northern Ireland and Wales both declined their invitations to attend. Was John Swinney right to attend, Bernard? What's your view of all this?
Yeah, I think he was right to attend for the same reason that I think that Starmer was quite right to eventually love bomb Trump. Now, I mean, let's sort of look at this on two levels. If you think that Donald Trump is a deplorable human being, and I do, if you look at his track record and a whole series of things, you would think this is not someone that I would choose to spend 5 minutes with. If you want to do angry politics, some people would say it's principled politics, but if you want to do angry politics and you want to consistently make a point, which will ultimately not have any real purpose because it will have no traction with the individual that it's against, then you say, we don't give him a state visit, we don't love bomb him, and we criticize him at every opportunity. We criticize him for his behavior towards Ukraine. We criticize him for his initial cozying up anyway in relation to Putin, although that seems to have gone sour given what he was saying yesterday. Or you take the view that I can deplore the person, but I can respect the office. And if I hold an office myself, I would expect a certain amount of respect from others, not necessarily to like me, but to respect the office. And in a growing up world, where in the UK there is anemic economic growth, where this week again we see the stubbornness of inflation, which will probably mean that there will be no further cuts in interest rates towards the end of the year, your obligation as a leader is to do everything that you possibly can to help the people that elected you. And that means investment into the country. It means attempting to get economic growth. It means attempting to get high-skilled jobs. It means attempting to get employment. So if you are a political leader, what is the choice that you make? Do you say this man is deplorable, is reprehensible, is of low moral character, I will have nothing to do with him, and the consequence of that is that you're hit with all sorts of tariffs, you don't get a trade deal, and the economic prospects of your country are narrowed as a consequence to the detriment of people who elected you to do a job in order to try and sustain the economy and get them jobs. And the realpolitik of the situation is that you deal with it. And Starmer, when he pulled out that letter of invitation in the Oval Office, knew precisely what he was doing. He probably said to himself, we will get a trade deal over the line. We will get inward investment into the UK if we cut through all of the nitty-gritty of politics and do the one thing that Trump always responds to, and that we massage his ego. And for the same reason, if John Swinney thinks that going to America, going to the Oval Office, having a conversation with the American president, exploiting the fact that the American president has a soft spot for Scotland because it's where his mother was born, he is in any position to try and bring influence to bear in relation to tariffs on Scotch whisky. That is what the First Minister is elected to do. And so again, Swinney and Starmer have a choice. Do they respect the office of another country, not necessarily the individual? And do they go ahead and do what is in their own national interest? And this looks to me the sort of classic scenario between, are you a Saloon-Bar revolutionary on one hand, are you going to be growing up about this and the other? And I don't think there is any contradiction whatsoever in saying Trump is a deplorable human being. But if you stop at that analysis and that governs absolutely everything you do in relation to him, then you're turning your back in investment and jobs in your own country. And that is not what politicians are elected to do.
Yeah, no, I mean, to get all Lord Palmerston on it, we don't have eternal allies, but we do have eternal interests. And it is very much in the United Kingdom's interest to have a good relationship with the United States of America. And that trumps the overcomes any doubts you might have about the individual character of a particular president. Personalities are less important than interest. And I think that's something that John Swinney recognizes. It's obviously something that Keir Starmer recognises. It is fundamentally what I think the electorate would expect from our political leaders too. That if you get away from the froth and fury of social media, you would find that most people actually think that Starmer and indeed Swinney have done the right thing here and have represented the national interest to the best of their abilities. And there are times when the optics of that are going to be unhelpful, awkward, even if you want to be pejorative about it, mildly humiliating. But nevertheless, that is the national interest, and so I think we're agreed on that. So shall we move on to our next topic then, Bernard? The abolition of not proven. Which I suppose is the headline piece of a wide-ranging justice bill that's been passed by Holyrood this week. You mentioned in the introduction that people have been campaigning for decades to have the not proven verdict abolished on the grounds that having three verdicts, two of which are acquittals, verdicts of acquittal, is confusing to jurors, to the public understanding of justice as well, and unfair on victims. Now, I think there have always been sort of two views on this, haven't there? That you have had some people who've been campaigning for the abolition of not proven because they think or hope that getting rid of that verdict of acquittal would lead juries to convict. I've never found that a very plausible argument. It seems to me that if you have two verdicts of acquittal and a jury chooses one of them, then if that one is taken away from them, they're left with not guilty rather than guilty. But so that was one of the major changes in the justice bill. The other big change in it, I think that perhaps hasn't received quite as much attention as it should, was to increase the number of jurors required to secure a guilty verdict. I think a lot of people, because they think of juries as being, 12 people and requiring a massive majority of them or a unanimous verdict and so on to get a guilty verdict, they forget that in Scotland, a jury is of 15 people and you only need a simple majority to secure a conviction. So 8 votes for guilty, 7 for not guilty, case proved. That is now changing. You will now need 10 votes to secure a conviction. And I suppose I would put it this way to you, but that this balances out some of the other changes that we've seen in the application of criminal justice in Scotland in recent years, notably the weakening of the standards required for corroboration, the notion that you must have 2 separate pieces of evidence at each stage of the prosecution case to demonstrate culpability. And that has been watered down quite significantly in recent decades. And I would suggest that increasing the number of jurors required to secure a guilty vote, to secure a conviction, is a way of balancing that out. But what's your view on these two really quite significant changes to the application?
Yeah, I mean, when I was a working journalist, I covered quite a lot on the not proven, and it was interesting that Joe Duffy was interviewed this week. People may well remember that his daughter Amanda Duffy was killed. A man called Francis Auld stood trial, charged with murder, and he walked free, verdict of acquittal, but it was not proven. I think there's so much misinformation around in this that it's important to try and cut through it. I mean, if you vox pop people, and again, they did it, the news programs were doing it this week, people were saying, oh, well, not proven means that the jury think that he or she did it, but there just isn't quite enough evidence. Now, this is said time and time again, almost as if it's fact. You can't say that, because the fact is we don't have an American system where jurors then sit on the 6 o'clock news and tell you why they decided to do what they did in relation to a verdict. That's not the way that it works. There's also been very, very little research done as to why juries actually decide to go for not proven. And indeed, as anyone who sat through a criminal trial will tell you, the judge doesn't even define what not proven actually means. The judge normally would sum up the evidence and say that there are 3 verdicts which you can bring in, which is guilty, and not proven. And the judge will normally say, and 2 of those verdicts are verdicts of acquittal. They have the same effect. But the judge doesn't try to explain to a jury what the difference is between not guilty and not proven. But because if not proven verdicts are brought in, they are regarded as unsatisfactory from the point of view of the victim, and they are also regarded as unsatisfactory from the point of view of the accused. I mean, I think it's right, actually, and I didn't used to always think this. I think it's right that we move to two verdicts, but I think that the two verdicts actually should be proven and not proven, not guilty and not guilty. And the reason for that is quite simple. The purpose of a criminal trial, some people say it's about justice. The purpose of a criminal trial is not about justice. The purpose of a criminal trial is to bring somebody before a court where there is an obligation in the Crown to prove a charge beyond reasonable doubt by leading evidence. Now, as a consequence of that, if somebody is found to be guilty, that may well be a just verdict. But guilt is a matter, is it not, almost of certainty. And there are plenty of cases in the criminal justice system where people have been found guilty who were not guilty. So even when the system is putting evidence before a court and somebody is found guilty, because the system is fallible, they are not always guilty. You have a thing called a miscarriage of justice. And therefore, the proper verdicts, in my view, given what the purpose of a criminal trial is, the charge against an accused should either be proven or not proven. Guilt and not guilt are definitive things, and you cannot be definitive because systems are always, at the end of the day, fallible. So I think that there should be two verdicts, but the verdict should be proven and not proven. I think a lot of the stuff around the not proven verdict about what it means is just the views of individuals. There is no evidence, because there's been no real work done in this, to suggest why jurors eventually opt for that. It's not defined to a jury by a judge. There is no working definition of it in law. And therefore, I think it's quite right that we move to two verdicts. On the point about, it's 15 jurors in Scotland, not 12. Too many people have been watching 12 Angry Men and all of that. I don't know enough about this, and I would like to understand the rationale for this, because, and I think there were one or two people who were expressing concern for this. I mean, if it's proven or not proven, and you're absolutely right, incidentally, and this is the key point. Even if the three verdicts had stayed, the key point here, in a sense, wasn't that there was three verdicts. The key point is that when the judge explains to them what beyond reasonable doubt actually means, and because the standard of proof in criminal trials is beyond a reasonable doubt, I always think that was the important thing. And you're quite right. It doesn't mean that because not proven has gone, that people are now going to go for guilty. They will go for not guilty, because the key thing is when the judge actually says the standard of proof is beyond reasonable doubt. And when that is explained to them, if they have a doubt, they'll go for not guilty, whereas they might have gone for not proven.
Yeah. I mean, the other thing I think that is interesting about this entire subject, but it is how uncontroversial it has been. And there, I think if this had come up in the days before the Scottish Parliament, before the devolution era and so on, there is not a chance that not proven would have been abolished, because the legal establishment, would have taken the view that you are watering down a unique part, or you are abolishing, in fact, a unique part of Scots law. You are making Scots law less Scots. And in the pre-devolution era, of course, the distinctiveness of the legal system, like the distinctiveness of religious affiliation and the distinctiveness of the education system in Scotland, were, if you like, a sort of central or sort of pillars of Scottish national distinctiveness, not necessarily an identity necessarily all the time, but of distinctiveness. And so the preservation of the things that made Scots law Scots was extremely important as a consideration that has an ancient lineage. You go all the way back to Sir Walter Scott's campaign as Malachi Malagrau that preserved the right of Scottish banks to issue their own notes back in the 19th century. I think you would have had to the barricades at the Faculty of Advocates about any suggestion that the not proven verdict be abolished back then. But because you now have a parliament as an institution, which thereby, if you like, substitutes for those for education, religion, the law, etc., as a guarantor, an expression of, and vehicle for a distinct Scottish approach to public policy, then you can actually water down the essential Scottishness of many of those institutions in a way that would not have been feasible previously.
Yeah, and I think the key question here is that when the legal profession start to oppose these things, are they opposing them because they just want tradition for the sake of it? Are they opposing it because they're all crusty and stuffy? Or do they actually think that it compromises the notion of justice? I mean, I would argue that they oppose it for the latter reason, because they think that it's removing essential safeguards. I mean, if we look at some of the key things that have happened, there used to be a rule in Scotland, that if, and the number of citizens who are lying in jail, about, what is it, anything like 20% of prisoners at any one time can be on remand. Mm-hmm. What that means is that citizens who have not been found guilty of a crime are in jail, and many of them languishing in jail for months, mm-hmm. and in some cases years, because the system doesn't bring them before the courts quickly enough. There used to be a rule in Scotland called the 110-day rule.
Yeah, I was just going to mention that. Yep.
And everybody said, when this goes, there is no incentive on the Crown to get cases into court quickly, and people are going to languish in jail who are innocent, because you're innocent until proven guilty. And that is exactly what has happened. And those who said we need to keep the 110-day rule argued for that in order that innocent citizens weren't locked up in jail for months or indeed for years. In relation to corroboration, the whole stuff in corroboration has been, if you like, reform by stealth. And I was certainly worried that a lot of the noise around corroboration, that the starting point was that the conviction rates in rape cases are too low. That's not the start. That should never be the starting point. That should never be the starting point in terms of why you want to reform something. And what we've now got, of course, where we effectively have, the abolition of corroboration in rape cases. And one of the reasons why you would then move from a simple majority in terms of culpability to a 2/3 majority is an explicit acknowledgement that if you start watering down safeguards, and corroboration was a safeguard, you run the risk of increasing the number of miscarriages of justice. And therefore, to balance the scales, if you like, you go from 8-7 and to 10-5. So you're absolutely right, incidentally, about the devolved era. Once you have a parliament which has legislative powers and 129 MSPs looking for something to do, they will start reforming, whether or not the reforms are good or bad. And you can remember that the first time there was an effort to deal with the abolition of corroboration as a general requirement in all cases, Parliament or the government led by Alex Salmond eventually backed down from that, because when the proposal went before the Parliamentary Committee, call them the legal establishment, if you like, absolutely killed this in committee, and they gave very, very good reasons why corroboration should be there. It does strike me that this is a function of, we now have a parliament. You're right, in the old days at Westminster, none of this would ever have got on the agenda. But there is now a greater degree of scrutiny, and that, in a sense, is no bad thing as a principle. But secondly, when you start reading the backdrop to some of this, we want the abolition of not proven because the guilty are walking free. not true, but that's a lot of the noise. We need the abolition of corroboration because the convictions in rape cases are too low. Well, the evidence in rape cases should be the evidence in every other case, because every citizen has the right to be tried on the same law of evidence, irrespective of the charge when they're brought before the court. And it does seem to me that a lot of what I would call the political noise around justice issues, in part, is driving some justice reforms. But on the one this week, I would support two verdicts on the basis that those people who think that if not proven was available, they'll go for guilty. It won't happen. It won't happen because the judge will explain to them that they have to be certain beyond reasonable doubt. That's the key thing. Mm-hmm. It's not the number of verdicts.
And the way our politicians talk about justice more generally is often quite confused and contradictory and so on. For many years, my impression has been that the overall sense at Holyrood is that we imprison too many people in Scotland, that we have higher rates of incarceration than elsewhere in the UK and unusually high rates of incarceration by European standards. And, Anas Sarwar brought this up at First Minister's Questions last week, where he suggested that shoplifting has effectively been decriminalised and that the SNP were soft on crime. And in response to that, John Swinney said, well, how can you possibly say that? Look, we are locking up record numbers of people. So which is it, First Minister? Is it shameful that we lock up so many people, or is it the case that we are not actually locking up enough people? Because rates of conviction and rates of investigation for shoplifting and other offences of that sort that are actually quite important because of their corrosive effect on public order overall. Are actually very low. Our politicians can't seem to make up their mind there. It's also the case that there are significant difficulties in the system. The Crown Office is underpowered, underfunded, under-resourced. There is a shortage of prosecutors. An enormous amount of time is now spent on historic sex cases. Welcome or sensible as that should be, it does divert attention away from an awful lot of, if you like, more recent and day-to-day criminal activities, draining resources from both Police Scotland and from the Crown Office. And that has, if you like, a sort of cascading effect throughout the justice system in terms of leading to delays and a generally unsatisfactory justice system at present. I think there is a widespread agreement that it is sort of creaking at the seams at present, and that there are lots of things that contribute to that and to those difficulties. But there isn't any great sign of long-term solutions either.
Oh, absolutely not, and it's because it's a soft hit for cuts. Simple as that. And I agree. On the subject of my view of incarceration is really quite simple. If you're convicted of a serious criminal offence, you have to go to jail. And I have some, although I'm instinctively soaking wet and liberal in most of these issues, if you are convicted of serious criminal offences, you go to jail for a long time. If you pose a danger to the public, the correct place for you is in jail. At the other end of the spectrum, which is repeated nuisance behaviour, and I think that people who shoplift time and time and time again, very often are people who are shoplifting in order to fund addiction issues which they have in their lives, and the idea that you'll sort them out by jailing them, it's not going to happen. This is mostly, I think, a social work issue than a criminal justice issue. The problem, of course, is that if they're repeat offenders, if they keep coming before the court and you've tried to send them on programs or you're giving community payback disposals and all the rest of it, when they're up for the 150th time, in a sense, where does a judge go with this? You perhaps say, well, we'll give them a period of incarceration and see if they will mend their ways. Inevitably that they don't. And what politicians don't like to admit is that sometimes it is better just to accept a certain level of nuisance behaviour rather than take the view that incarceration is where people who have chaotic lives should have.
This is because we can no longer send them to Australia, Bernard.
Well, let's move on. And we learned this week that Jamie Hepburn...
Oh, God.
are not friends. Now, I listened to what Mr. Ross said. I looked at the doorstep of the very, very sheepish Mr. Hepburn. Didn't he look very awkward indeed? And I'm looking at this, and I remember thinking of the days when I used to go to Westminster, into the Strangers' Bar and onto the terrace and the various corridors and nooks and crannies of Westminster. And some of the stuff which I observed on the Parliamentary estate very late at night, very early in the morning, normally after much drink had been taken, I have to say it would make you blush. It would make a hardened criminal blush, so it would. But, sort of 20-odd years ago, the standards, the norms, what is expected, what is acceptable, what is unacceptable, completely and utterly changed. And you can go into the specifics of the case, but it does appear to me that if you're looking to go to Holyrood next year, then conduct yourself by the expected norms and standards of today. I could give you one or two examples of what I witnessed in yesteryear, which I will as we go on to discuss it. But I suspect this, unless CCTV footage or witnesses come out the woodwork today, tomorrow, over the weekend, that Mr. Swinney will give, to use a refereeing analogy, which Mr. Ross will appreciate, that Mr. Hepburn will get a yellow card and not a red card.
Yes, I suppose we should explain for listeners who haven't been paying attention to this extraordinary saga of world-shattering importance that it all begins with seagulls. Seagulls mobbing people and nicking their chips on the Murray coast. Douglas Ross has had a bee in his bonnet about this for months now and has been demanding all sorts of urgent questions and national debate and a government strategy for how to deal with the menace of seagulls. And he has some support for this. I mean, Fergus Ewing is also very much on board in the anti-seagull movement. And anyway, there's supposed to be a summit of some sort next week, and Douglas Ross
a seagull
summit, yes. And Douglas Ross has correctly, I suppose, identified that it is to be a sham summit because the members of the public are to be excluded from it, and it is to be hosted by Nature Scott, who are the enemy because they have been they are in the pocket of Big Gull. And don't take the thing seriously at all. And so Douglas Ross, he was demanding a further debate at Holyrood on the menace posed by gulls, presumably around the country, but particularly in his constituency. And there was then an altercation at the close of business on Wednesday with Jamie Hepburn, the Minister for the Parliament, responsible for the parliamentary timetable, who, again, I'm afraid to say, doesn't appear to be taking the menace of the killer gulls sufficiently seriously. And Mr. Ross alleges that he was assaulted by Mr. Hepburn, who swore at him. I mean, imagine. Swearing, gosh. Mr. Hepburn says, well, I did use a degree of industrial language and so on with Mr. Ross and so on, but nothing he won't have heard at Ibrox or Parkhead or Pittodrie.
He's read one or two banners at Celtic Park, which are very explicit in terms of language.
Well, yes. I think lots of people will be listening to this podcast before the watershed, so we won't go into what the Green Brigade and other reprobates have been suggesting to Mr. Ross.
One that begins with C and ends in T, that will cover it.
Qubit. Anyway, the definition of assault does appear to have been watered down as well, because it's possible that this was a hand on the shoulder, and really,
Oh, but we have a politically correct Procurator Fiscal Service now. He might not be barking up the wrong tree, you know.
Well, Mr. Ross is still considering whether to report this deplorable incident to Police Scotland, and really, I mean, grow up, both of them. A storm in an espresso cup, if that.
Yeah, I mean, Dennis Healey was the Chancellor of the Exchequer. The Chancellor of the Exchequer, no doubt, when he used to pursue Labour MPs in the division lobbies and have them against the wall. And what was his famous quote? "You're all out of your tiny Chinese minds."
Yeah, and then a Chinese burn, if you're allowed to still call them such things.
Chinese burn, yeah. And this was the Chancellor of the Exchequer. And I remember one former Labour MP now passed away, who told me that he'd another Labour MP against the wall, had him by the neck, told him to get outside, that we were going to, in the Glasgow Parliaments, have a square go, because this individual had referred to him as a new Labour prod. And
he said, "I'm no such thing. I'm a new Labour Catholic."
Well, he was an old Labour Catholic. That was the problem. So the new Labour prod jibe was actually was wrong in both counts. And this is the kind of stuff that happened. And, you know, in the old days on the terrace, there were folks swinging at one another. The language was industrial. What should have happened with this kind of stuff is that, given that Jamie Hepburn admits to language unbecoming, is that when he calmed down, he should have sought out Douglas Ross, offered an apology, offered to meet him, shake hands on it, and that should have been the end of the matter. Now, the extent to which was it insult, I don't know. Only the two of them, I suppose, know what happens. But there we go. And I don't think that we should detain ourselves too much on this issue, because from seagulls, I think we should move to the much more important thing about the Auditor General's observations about the black hole in the Scottish Government's budget, which is going to emerge given the commitments which they have made on various welfare payments, because this gets back really to the real stuff of government, and it gets back to one of the themes of this podcast, which is that you're entitled to spend money where you want to spend it, but you should plan for it, and you should do it in a responsible way. And, you know, the Auditor General, not for the first time, and I suspect not for the last time, is calling the government out about making commitments where they are not sure how they're going to pay for it. And of course, this is all within the context where if Rachel Reeves changes tack later on this year and in subsequent budgets and ushers in an age of new austerity because she decides she doesn't want to go down the tax increasing cut, these projected figures of a shortfall by 2029 are going to get even bigger. But the problem will then be that the Scottish Government will run out of road about where it can go to plug the black hole. So I have always said for several years now that the real opposition to the government in Scotland is not to be found in the opposition benches at Holyrood. The real opposition for laying it on the line in terms of bad politics is the Auditor General. Thank goodness we have a public servant who's not afraid to call out politicians.
Yeah, the Auditor General, I would add the Fraser of Allender Institute, the Institute for Fiscal Studies as well. You know, that is... and the Scottish Fiscal Commission. These are the people who are in the habit of pointing out unwelcome and awkward truths and realities to the government. And you're absolutely right about it. You know, there's a £2 billion hole or difference between the Scottish Government's commitments and the money it has to fund those commitments. And that $2 billion is by the end of this decade, which is not very far away. And some of it is a question of the Scottish child payment, which has been increased quite significantly in recent years. But quite a lot of it also revolves around disability payments. And the question that nobody really wants to grasp, I think, is that, the Scottish government has made doing things differently from how they're done at Westminster, regardless of whether it's a Conservative or a Labour government at Westminster, that the Scottish government makes a virtue out of doing things differently. And so they have, as they put it themselves, a kinder, more generous, more decent, morally superior benefit system in Scotland now that the Social Security of Scotland is being created. And so as a result of that, all the incentives run to handing out cash and asking questions later, if indeed you ask questions at all. So when, for example, you have a review of a person's eligibility for disability payments because their circumstances may have changed. In England, around 20% of these reviews say, well, actually, yes, your benefit should be stopped because you are no longer requiring it. You are no longer meeting the definitions of disabled that require this level of assistance. Now, some, as John Swinney says, some of those cases are then appealed and the initial verdict is overturned. Nevertheless, 20% is your starting point there. In Scotland, it's 3%. So even if you say that, it seems unlikely that, people in Scotland and people in England are materially different in their actual circumstances. And so you have a system in Scotland where you literally tick a box and say, my circumstances have not changed. I continue to receive my £100 a week or so. And Russell Findlay brought this up at First Minister's Questions this week. And I thought he asked a number of perfectly sensible questions. To which John Swinney didn't have any answers, because how is it possible that you have this difference between, how cases are adjudicated in England and how they're adjudicated in Scotland? And then you have the question of, it's not so much whether there is a huge amount of fraud in the system, although everybody accepts there will be a little, but there won't be as much as the general public will think there is, because the public tends to overestimate the amount of fraud in the system. The bigger question is, what is the definition of disabled? Because nobody, I think, wants to take money away from people with, say, conditions such as, say, multiple sclerosis, where additional funding to help cost or offset the cost of their condition is essential in terms of assisting them to play a full part in life. But the question of, there has been an eligibility creep in recent years across the United Kingdom, whereby people who are suffering from ADHD or anxiety or other issues that would not traditionally have been termed disabilities are now deemed eligible for disability payments. And that, it seems to me, is the bigger problem. So when John Swinney says to Russell Findlay, or indeed to anybody who questions the size of the benefits bill, well, what would you cut? Well, that is where you would start, and so on, is from first principles. What is the definition of disabled?
Yeah, I mean, there are two separate issues, aren't there? There's the issue of the criteria and whether or not that is being policed appropriately. And there is the second point, is the amount of money that this is going to cost. I'm making no real criticism of the Scottish government in terms of things like the child payment. I'm not making any criticisms at all, but I am standing with the Auditor General in that it's bad politics to take a decision when you don't know where the money is going to come from. He was very critical of the government when they were signing off on public sector pay increases a year or two ago, and they were signing them off and didn't know where they were going to find the money. Again, I would have supported the government over in a cost of living crisis, helping workers as much as possible. So I'm not quarrelling in a sense with the policy choices. What I'm quarrelling with is that you cannot put these on a sustainable footing unless you know how they're going to be paid. And if Westminster budgets go on a downward trajectory and the consequences are bad, you're going to be forced into panic measures where you will be really cutting public services in Scotland, because it's the only way that you can balance the books. And the reason you will be doing that is that you're taking choices and not funding them properly and putting them on a footing which is not sustainable. But it is, I'm afraid, the modern disease. This week we learn that the triple lock is going to go up by 4.7%. There's another 6 billion onto the pension bill last year. We have governments in France that are collapsing because they're doing wicked things like raising the pension age to 64. And I was looking, and of course in the UK, where the percentage of the state pension, which accounts for GDP, is projected to go from 5 to 7%. Well, the French are already at this stage way up, I think, at 10%. And again, it's this kind of thing. When people say this is not sustainable, what they mean is that at some point they will run out of money, at some point they won't be able to afford it, and at some point they're going to do something apocalyptic, like they did in Greece years ago, where pensioners were told, well, your pension is now halved because we've run out of money. So the argument, and it's a sound one which the Auditor General makes, it's not that these policy choices are not decent. Of course they are. Of course, trying to make sure that pensioners are looked after, or the most marginalised in society are looked after, is a good thing. I would absolutely support it. But if you don't put it on a sustainable footing, and that means making tough policy choices in other areas, then long term, what you risk doing as a government is then attacking the very people that you're trying to help because you haven't put the policy on a sustainable footing. So 3 cheers for the Auditor General. And by the way, these are the kind of issues, these are the hard issues which should dominate the election next year, because they cut to the chase about the hard issues which all governments face. And I bet you they don't get a mention.
No, because what we have, both in London and in Edinburgh, and presumably in Cardiff and Belfast too, but also in other European countries, as you say, France is having a big argument about these things. Politicians in Germany are talking about how the social welfare bill is unsustainable there as well. So this isn't just a uniquely Scottish or a uniquely British phenomenon, like so many other things and so on. It has lots of comparisons could be drawn with other countries, peer countries around the world. But fundamentally, Bernard, what I would say is that we have a political system where essentially we now organise our politics on a buy now, pay later basis.
Absolutely.
And that's not good.
It's not good. It's, if there's been one theme of this podcast since we started it, I think over a year and a half ago now, it's that we're not quibbling. We're not questioning the integrity of our leaders. We're not necessarily even rubbishing the choices that they make. It is how they make them, and it is the fraud. And this is all of the parties. This is not one political party. This is all of the political parties. The way they dance to electoral cycles, the way they make unsustainable promises, the way they box themselves in, the way the UK government has in terms of tax policy, because it makes promises to make people feel good and to make the business of politics look easy when it's nothing but. And the responsibility always of politicians is to say, this is what I believe in, and this is how I'm going to pay for it. And if paying for it means painful choices in other areas, it means having the political guts to eyeball the electorate and explain it. And you know what? Occasionally, if they did that, people might just respect them a bit more.
And on that cheery note, I'd just conclude with this question for listeners. Are you feeling good? And can you handle the truth? We'll return to these questions next week and in the months to come as we look forward to Holyrood 2026. But for the time being, it's goodbye from me.
And I'm feeling very good because I am going out for a boozy journalist's lunch. And from me, it's goodbye.